You wake up when your body decides it is time. No alarm pulls you from sleep. No schedule tells you where to be. You sit up, stretch, and ask yourself a single question. What do I want to do today? For 99% of human history, this was not a thought experiment. This was the actual reality of every morning for roughly 300,000 years. And how people answered that question looked nothing like the life most of us are living right now. Modern humans spend around 90,000 hours of their lives at work. That is approximately 1/3 of all waking time dedicated to employment. But for the vast majority of human existence, jobs simply did not exist. There were no wages, no employers, no career paths to follow. So what did people actually spend their time doing? The clearest answers come from research. In 1963, archaeologist Richard Lee conducted a study that fundamentally shifted how we think about prehistoric lives. He observed the daily habits of the Dobju people in Botswana, one of the few remaining communities still living in a way that closely resembles pre-agricultural human life. What he found was striking. Adults spent roughly 2.5 days each week obtaining food, around 17 hours total. Everything else was theirs to use as they chose. This pattern does not belong to one group or one region. The Hadza in Tanzania, the Aceh in Paraguay, the Martu in Australia. Completely separate cultures spread across different continents, all showing the same result. Between 15 and 20 hours per week spent on survival activities. Most people today work nearly double that. A reasonable question arises here. These are contemporary groups. How can we know ancient humans lived similarly? The answer is preserved in their skeletons. When scientists compare the bones of ancient hunter-gatherers to those of early farming populations, the contrast is hard to ignore. Farmers were shorter. Their bones carry signs of nutritional deficiency. Their teeth show extensive decay from grain-heavy diets. Their spines reflect years of repetitive physical strain. They died younger. Ancient human remains tell a different story. Taller, physically stronger, healthier teeth, less joint deterioration. Their bodies show far less wear from repetitive labor, not more. But the most compelling evidence for how people spent their time comes from something that should not exist if survival dominated every waking hour. Art. In 1994, a cave was discovered in southern France. Inside were paintings created approximately 30,000 years ago. Horses, lions, and rhinoceroses drawn with genuine perspective, shading, and a clear sense of movement. These were not rough sketches. They were sophisticated works that required skill, planning, and significant time. Someone chose to spend hours deep inside a cave by firelight painting animals onto stone walls. Not for food, not for protection, for meaning, for beauty. For the simple act of creating something. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, archaeologists uncovered shell beads estimated to be 100,000 years old. Tiny holes had been carefully drilled through seashells, clearly intended to be worn as jewelry. The nearest coastline was 20 kilometers away. Someone walked 40 kilometers to collect those shells and then spent additional hours drilling through them with stone tools simply to wear something beautiful. A 40,000-year-old flute carved from a vulture bone was found in Germany in 2008. 5 finger holes spaced with precision. Whoever crafted it understood music. They understood how pitch works, and they invested real time in making it. Not for hunting, not for survival, for sound. These discoveries are not rare exceptions. Across Europe, Africa, and Asia, archaeological sites from 100,000 years onward consistently contain decorative objects. Carefully constructed tools far more refined than basic survival required, and items that clearly took hours of focused effort with no immediate practical return. When people were not finding food, they were making things. They were decorating. They were building beauty into their everyday lives. Here's roughly how a day unfolded. You wake near dawn. The previous night's fire is still going. Someone feeds it more wood. You eat what was left from the day before. Meat perhaps or fish. Some nuts or fruit gathered recently. The morning meal is unhurried and social. People talk and loosely consider what the day might hold. Not out of obligation, but because planning together is simply what people do. Mid-morning, a small group might head out to hunt or gather. But this did not happen every single day. If a successful hunt had taken place 2 days earlier and there was still food available, there was no reason to go out at all. That time might instead go toward maintaining tools, sharpening a spear, weaving something useful, working an animal hide until it was soft enough to use. This is not work in the way we understand the word today. There is no clock to watch and no one looking over your shoulder. You do it because being capable matters, because skill earns respect within the group, and because making things well is part of what it means to be human. When hunting did take place, it rarely resembled the frantic pursuit common in dramatized versions of prehistory. Humans are persistence hunters. We track animals at a steady pace across long distances until they overheat and can no longer continue. We are uniquely capable of this because we can sweat and regulate body temperature while moving. Most animals cannot sustain that over time. We simply outlast them. A hunt typically covered 3 to 6 hours, including travel. The animal was then carried back and prepared communally. Everyone ate, and by early afternoon the productive portion of the day was largely complete. What followed is the part that modern people tend to struggle to fully appreciate. People rested. They sat in shade and talked. They spent time with children. They groomed one another, a practice that reinforces social bonds. They made jewelry from shells, beads, or animal teeth. They carved patterns into bone or stone. They slept briefly. Anthropologist James Woodburn documented that among the Jew people, adults spent around 6 hours daily in what he described as social time. Not working and not sleeping, just being present with others. Laughing, talking, and telling stories. In a world without written law, currency, or formal contracts, Relationships were the actual foundation of survival. If people did not want to be around you, they were under no obligation to share food during difficult periods. So enormous amounts of time and energy went into maintaining those connections. Not because it was efficient, but because human well-being depended on it entirely. As the sun went down, something worth noting took place. In 2014, anthropologist Polly Wiesner analyzed recordings of conversations among the Jew people spanning hundreds of hours. Daytime conversation was largely practical. Where had animal tracks been spotted? Which plants were ready to harvest? Had someone failed to share fairly? But once night arrived and people gathered around fires, 81% of conversations shifted towards storytelling. Myths about how the world came to be. Tales of ancestors who accomplished extraordinary things. Jokes that spread laughter through the group. Stories from distant places. Wiesner proposed that this is where human culture genuinely took root. Concepts of God, spirits, history, and the future only become possible to discuss when hunger is not pressing and safety is felt. Sleep itself worked differently from how most people experience it now. Historical records from medieval Europe and sleep research conducted in the 1990s both confirmed that before artificial lighting, humans rested in two separate phases. A first sleep of roughly 4 hours, then a quiet waking period lasting 1 to 2 hours in complete darkness, then a second sleep of another 4 hours. Putting this together, a typical day involved around 4 to 6 hours of food gathering or tool making, approximately 6 hours of social interaction, storytelling, and other shared activities, around 8 hours of sleep divided across 2 periods, and a remaining portion of the day simply spent existing, sitting, watching, resting without needing to account for the time. Then roughly 10,000 years ago, something fundamental shifted. Communities in the Fertile Crescent began cultivating crops and raising animals. Agriculture arrived, and with it came a kind of lock-in. Farming could support larger populations. Larger populations required more food. More food demanded more farming. Within a few generations, populations grew beyond any possibility of returning to the previous way of life. There were simply too many people to feed through hunting and gathering alone, and farming demanded considerably more effort. Preparing soil, planting, managing weeds, harvesting, preserving stores, and protecting crops from animals and competing groups. The physical evidence from skeletons is clear. Early farmers worked harder, ate less well, and died sooner than the hunter-gatherers who preceded them. Yet populations kept expanding. With greater numbers came specialization. Toolmakers, potters, weavers, builders, then soldiers, administrators, and religious authorities. Eventually, employment itself appeared. The idea that your time could belong to someone else in exchange for what you needed to live. Once cities existed, the original way of human life had effectively ended. In its place came schedules, obligations, and the expectation that most waking hours would be devoted to participation in a system humans had constructed. Today, the average person spends 90,000 hours working across a lifetime. Your ancestors spent a fraction of that. You sleep in a single block each night and treat waking at 2 in the morning as a disorder. They rested in 2 natural phases and used the quiet middle hours for reflection. You spend much of your life working toward goals defined by standards that society created and continues to reinforce. They woke each morning already free, already sufficient, with nothing to prove to anyone. They were not working toward a retirement that would finally give them time to live. They were already living in exactly that way. They made art because time for it existed naturally. You make art if there is any time left after everything else. And that impulse to create is not something new. It is simply what humans have always done when they are not occupied with obligations someone else placed on them. We have not changed as a species. We have only changed how we spend our hours. And in doing so, we traded freedom for food security, personal time for population growth, and leisure for a system built on continuous productivity.